Well, welcome to another episode of Digging Deeper. My name is Pastor Bradley Martin, and I'm excited that you joined us yet again for another week as we are starting the second week of a new study that I have entitled Love One. And I'll explain a little bit of that, give you a recap in case you missed last week. You can always go back and look over any previous Bible studies or any podcasts that we've had. Now, just to let you know, we are fully on the podcast scheme on the podcast scene. For those who do podcasts, you can find us on platforms like Apple and on Spotify, and I think pretty much any podcast stream that you may use. You can go back and look at those. You can share those pretty easily. You can also, of course, find us on our social media weekly if you're joining this as you have been doing the past few months, or you can go back and look at it on YouTube later. So that being said, again, feel free to share these. Feel free to use these in whatever study situation that you may be in. I'm just very excited that you joined us for another week as we continue in our study. And we're heading toward the book of First Corinthians, chapter number 13, about love. Last week, just to give you kind of a background, I went through a lot of stuff about how some things, if you're watching this currently, and I do feel if you're watching this in the future, we probably just went through these same sort of things, whether it be violence in the world, school shootings, any of that sort of nature. I think those are unfortunately becoming more normal per se, and I don't even like to use that terminology, but they're becoming more common here most recently. And I do feel like in the future we'll have, unfortunately, at least the same amount, if not more, until Jesus comes back and takes his bride, us, the church, back home with him. I think we'll still have those kinds of things because, well, and I'll kind of walk you through some of those reasons today. But last week we looked at, we talked a little bit about the introduction to the study and kind of why God's kind of laid this on me to do this. We also looked at some different types of love. I'm not the great scholar in the room, but I do use the tools that are available to all of us. And you can go back and listen to those. I do want to remind you that I do feel like one of the difficulties we have in expressing love and sharing love with each other is that the English language only has really one form of the word love, and that's love, love. Whereas you can go to the Greek and find at least four different types of love, and they are very contextual in that. And so, in order for somebody to understand exactly what love you're talking about, they do have to take it in the context in which you're saying it. If we're speaking in English, which the majority of the bulk of us, if not all of us that are listening to this, do. For instance, I can tell my wife that I love you. I can tell my children that I love them. Um, I can tell my parents that I love them. I can tell you that I love you in all different ways. But I can also, in the same sentence, say, I love pizza. I love cheesecake. I love Clemson Tigers. I love whatever your sports team is. You can use that same word, those same four letters, in order to convey that you love them. And that is, of course, a totally different type of love than what you or I are intending it to be. Whereas when I say I love my wife, I love her in multiple ways. I love her because she's my wife. She's my best friend. I don't love her the same way I love a hamburger or a cheeseburger or whatever type of food you enter into that equation. So that's again to me one of the more difficult things that we have to conquer as we move forward talking about love. And I think one of the problems again that we have communicating that is, and of course you know that I as well as others work in a school, and in order for me to convey to do my job, not the job that I'm hired to do per se, but the job that I'm called to do by my Father, by my higher calling by God, is to love. Wherever you're at, you're to love. And if I go and tell a student, "Hey, I love you," without the context of that statement, then things can get a little weird. They can get a little uncomfortable. Again, just because most teenagers and some adults, most adults probably, if you say "I love you," we get a little uncomfortable, especially when guys start saying, "Hey, I love you." It gets a little uncomfortable because we don't think of it in a broader sense than most do. Most teenagers would go straight to that physical, erotic love because they're teenagers. Some adults do the same thing. Whereas when I say "I love you," I mean I really, it goes beyond the scope of that. It's that agape love that we talked about at length last session. So that being said, I went through all that introduction. I'll recap just a little bit. But I want to look at this week kind of where it all started. All right. So where did this love thing start? Because you can't get to where you're wanting to go unless you know where you came from. I can't get to a destination unless I know where I started. And so we're kind of backtracking because we all kind of assume, I think we have a false assumption that we all have the same understanding of love. And that's false because many have come through many different things. Unfortunately, some terrible things that some that yes, of you that may even be listening to this today may have gone through some very tragic, very toxic things that some people might call love. People have been abused, and some people say, "I love you," but they abuse you. And so you have this false sense of love. There's been many marriages or many relationships that have been broken, that somebody for or both parties said, I love you." And then all of a sudden you don't love anymore. Is that possible? And those are the things we're going to look at. But all understanding of where love really started is kind of where I want us to focus at on this session, and kind of the tragedy when we lost that love. So let's begin this week by looking at where it all began. Of course, you can't start where it all began unless you look at the beginning. Very first thought, very first sentence of the Bible, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And again, just a side note, God's not bound by time. We always want to place some sort of time frame. Um, Scientists, mathematicians, and everybody alike have always, religious scholars have all argued how about time. Well, I just know, I don't know because God's not bound by time. It said in the beginning, God. So God was there in the beginning, and in the beginning of whether it's this chapter of humanity or whether it's whatever, it doesn't matter. God created the heavens and the earth. And I want you to notice, if you go back, I didn't write all these verses down, but in all of that commonality throughout the whole first chapter of the book of the Bible with the book of Genesis, you have this statement after he created everything. You see this in verse 4, 10, 12, 18, 21, 25. He said it was good. So when he created the heavens and the earth, he said it was good. When he created the seas, it was good. When he created plants, it was good. When he created the animals, it was good. So everything had this good connotation. It was complete. It was something that God was proud of in his creation, so that there was no fault, there was no sin at this point in time, there was nothing that went awry, there was no disease, there was nothing in creation that would call it anything else but what he called it good. Now, interestingly so, in verse 31, after all that he created, on the sixth day, he created man. And he didn't say it was good, he said it was very good. So you use that extra adjective there that said it not only was good, it was very good. So you have this sense of creation that God created everything was perfect, everything was in line, um, everything was just right. God loved his creation. God saw that man was not good to be alone, so he created a helpmate. He created Eve to be with Adam. And so you have this perfect place where God loved. So God was full of love. God showed his love by creating. He didn't create because he loved us. He created us to be worshiped, for us to worship him, for us to give him glory, because everything in this is pointed back to God. Okay. Everything that was created was to declare the the heavens declare the glory of God. His creation declared his glory. Everything was shouting and pointing straight back to God. Now, we know that here in 15 through 17 of chapter 2, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And the Lord commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you shall surely die. So again, we have this perfect sense, this creation that was perfect. It was not in balance, because imbalance means that both sides carry equal weight. Okay. It was perfect. It was within the boundaries of where God could dwell. We know that God is righteous, he's holy, he's good, he's everything that is perfect. And so God could not have God would not have declared this good had it not have been good. So this is really good. So God has taken Adam, he's taken man, and he's put him in the garden, and he gave them the job to work it and keep it. He gave him dominion over all creation, including the animals and the birds and all that stuff, right? And he said, I just got one set of rules. He said, I got one framework that you got to stay in. He said you can eat. He said, as far as you can see, you can eat everything you want to, but you can't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because once you eat that, you'll die. So we have this perfect place where there's no death. He's got one stipulation, one set of rules that says you can do everything you want to. You have complete dominion. He said, but you can't partake of this tree. Now, a couple of thoughts I had here. Love means that there are rules. If you are a parent, you know this for a fact, or if even if you're not a parent, you've been a child of somebody, and you may not totally understand, and you may not like rules. But when there's rules, there's love, and when there's love, there's rules. So I use it this way. I work in a school, so I'm around all sort of kids. I've coached before. I've seen a great vast number of kids, a wide range. I've seen kids that have strict parents. I have kids that have parents that have no rules and they just kind of do what they want to. I myself, my wife and me and I have four girls, as you know. Two of them are in adulthood, and two of them are still um, teenagers. And so, even within the confines of that, we brought them up in a set of rules. Now rules create that framework in which we all work. Now, what does a framework mean? So, if you're building a house, if you're building whatever you are, but if you're to me, it's easier to think of it this way. If you're building a house, you have a frame that you work within. There is a foundation, and you build that house on that foundation inside that framework. If you get outside that framework, if you put an extra board that is not exactly centered in that that foundation, then what can happen is eventually that's going to fall. It's going to crumble, it's going to break. If you put something over, if you put a floor over something that's not grounded in foundation or in the side of the framework, then it's not going to be good. It's going to fall. If you're playing a sport, there's rules involved in that sport, and the reason there's rules is so everybody can have the same competitive advantage. Because if you just let the most athletic people do whatever they want to, then it's not going to be a game anymore. It's not fun. But when you have these rules, you have a framework. There is love there. So when I tell my when our children were growing up and are still growing up, we have certain rules. For instance, we have rules about cell phone usage. There's a certain time at night that cell phone goes off, and it is, and we tried to um, we tried in different ways to give some freedom, and it works for some, and it doesn't work for others. And so, if you have a child that needs more framework, you have to put more rules in, and you have to be more rigid. And as the children grow up, the hope is that what you have created there will be sustainable. I go back to a bowling analogy. When you're a very young kid and you may have been taken by your parents to go bowling, you may have those bumpers up in the gutter because most kids can't, and some adults can't throw it within the confines of that bowling alley, that lane. And so again, for most of us, we know that if the ball goes into the gutter, you don't score any points. And you do that often enough, it's no fun. Well, what you can do with kids and with novice bowlers is you can put those bumper guards, and so it doesn't go inside there. Um, and eventually, the older you get, you don't keep those. You learn how to bowl inside the framework of that alley. It's like when you're teaching somebody to drive, you have a certain set of expectations, right? And sometimes most of the time we're harder on kids when they first start, when they first have these freedoms to do things, the driving and the staying up. And the hope is that it's not just so we can have a set of rules, but as they get older and they get on their own, they know right from wrong, and that they know this is the speed I'm supposed to drive, and this is the way I'm supposed to drive, and they know that I shouldn't be up past this point in time because nothing good happens after a certain time, unless, of course, you have a job that you have to work. Some of us do. So you have this framework in which the rules they create a framework. And what this is order. This is the way things are supposed to be. They're supposed to be in order. God created man to be in dominion or in control over the earth. But what Satan jumped in, and Satan was trying to deceive them in order to think, hey, you can eat of this fruit. Did he really say that? Did he really mean this? Did he mean you shall really die? Because what he was trying to get it was to get it in disorder, to get it out of order, or the opposite of framework is chaos. And chaos is where Satan thrives. Chaos is where we don't know, we don't have a solid truth. There is no absolutes. There is no way that we can say this is always right or this is always wrong. That's where Satan loves to thrive. And teenagers, especially children, they don't like rules. They see their friends. They see their friends having the ability to do this, and they see their friends' ability to stay up at night and have their phones and watch TV all night long and play games all night long. Trust me, I have kids in my classroom that stay up all night long because they don't have that framework. And that's not a good place to be. They're always tired. They can't focus. They can't do all the things that a child is supposed to be able to do at this age. And so that's why we create that framework. That's why God created this framework in which love was the dominating thought. Love was the rule. Now, God created a place where he could walk with his creation. As I said before, God was a holy God. God was righteous. He's all these things. He can't be around evil because he's holy. And so we know that this Eden was a perfect place. Now, verse 8 is after the fact, but it gives us a picture of what he did prior to this. And so don't get this confused. So, and they heard the sound, and they, meaning Adam and Eve, heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man with his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of his garden. So we know that there was time that God could spend with his creation. He had what I call communion, and that's a big word and kind of an antiquated word that we use when we think of the Lord's Supper. But all of that stuff means there's fellowship, there's open fellowship, there's not equality, but there's just bonding between God and his creation. He loved them. He wanted to spend time with them. He didn't create this time, he didn't create this creation so that there would be a separation. He created it so that we could fellowship with him, could walk and talk with him. Now, of course, we know that they sinned, they broke that fellowship, and what that does is that creates a vacuum. Now, let me explain kind of what I mean by vacuum here. So um if you work in your yard, let's just say that. So if you like to work outside, and whether you're working with your grass or whether you're working with a flower bed or whatever it is, if open dirt is left open, okay, and by that I mean if you have a spot of grass in your yard that doesn't have grass in it and it's just dirt, if you leave that alone, eventually there's going to be weeds that start growing up in there. That's why in our flower gardens, there's always weeds that pop up because there's open ground. Now you can put mulch and you can put stuff on top of that, but there's always a vacuum of whatever you're trying to do. So it's always there's a missing component of that. You see, love is the same way here. When there's not love, then you have the opposite that's introduced, and I think that's hate. Now, because of the sin that Adam and Eve committed, God did three things. He put enmity between the serpent and the woman. He told the woman she would have to experience pain in her childbirth, and be contrary to her husband, and that the man would have to work the ground and sweat over the ground. So all these things were the stipulations of, or the consequences of the sin that happened because of Adam and Eve. But the main thing here is that love, that fellowship, that love between God and his creation was broken. And so when you have that broken fellowship, again, that's when hate comes in. If you don't fill yourself with love, then what's going to happen is that you're going to allow hate to come into it. And it may not start as I hate you or I can't stand you. It may just mean I really don't like you, or I really don't care for you. You have to be that there is this vacuum where hate's introduced here. So now where we're heading is the first big instance of hate, where kind of I think all the violence all began. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain was a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also the fruit of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." This is such a great picture of what I was saying about that vacuum that's created whenever there's a break in love. There there is, and I read several different commentaries on this, and I've heard this preached. This really, this offering that both Cain and Abel gave, they were different. One, Abel was a keeper of the sheep. Cain was a worker of the ground. But it's not because that Cain gave the fruit of the ground and Abel gave his one of his flock. It has nothing to do with the kind of offering that they gave. Because you can go and study later that both of those offerings were accepted by God. Both of the grain, you can go in Leviticus and study that. Both of the grain and of the animal sacrifice. Neither would be able to ultimately atone for sin, right? We're heading to Jesus, of course, and everything that we do, and Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. But if you read in Hebrews, and this is Hebrews 11:4, you get a little bit better picture of what Moses wrote in Genesis by the author of the book of Hebrews, by faith. And again, it's by faith, and this is the Hall of Faith chapter. So by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, he died. Though he died, he still speaks. So we those first two words give us the ultimate reason why there was a difference. Abel offered his in faith. Cain did not. God gave him the ability to change his, but he didn't. He allowed his anger to take over his countenance, not only his countenance, but his mind, and ultimately cause him to commit murder. Because God says here, and if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Sin was knocking, it was waiting. It was there waiting for that opportunity to jump in, because again, there was this break in love. And when there's a break in love, hate fills that break. It fills that gap. That ultimately, and we'll read here, Cain spoke to his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." So we have, because Cain allowed hate to enter, he allowed sin, he allowed this distaste, this whatever verb you want to use or noun you want to use here to say he felt it. When that love was broken, because of that sin, there entered something else that was not intended to be there. God ultimately created us. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to nations." Before we were even born, God knows us and he loves us. And he desires to be with us. And ultimately, as we've looked at in different Bible studies, we're going to return to Eden here on this earth, with the new heaven and the new earth, where we will abide with him forever. But in the meantime, there is this cause of hate that has broken fellowship. Um, so 1 John 4:7 says, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. And then skip down to verse 19. We love because he first loved us. We all know John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life, eternal life. God loved us so much that he created this place for us. Even with sin, he loved us so much and he wanted us to be with him, that he became the atonement in Jesus. And will ultimately, if we accept him, we have that love that comes from him that we can share with others. And eventually we will spend eternity with him if we truly love him and if we accepted him as our Lord and Savior. So that's kind of where it all begins. That's where this love started. And that's where that love was broken. Um, and so I hope this was helpful as we've looked at this. As we continue in this, again, we're heading toward the solution, which is in 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul writes about love. But again, I felt like it was necessary for us to take some time and get a little background about where love started. I hope this was good for you. I appreciate you joining us this time. We will look for you the next time. Again, if you have any questions, concerns, please let us know. We'll try to answer those as best as we can. Appreciate you listening, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. Thanks. Have a great week.